welcome in to this week's edition of the Qi Time Collective with me, Clara Apollo. This is the show where your energy matters, and I'm a Qi Gong teacher and curious explorer of natural energy healing methods like Reiki, EFT, color psychology, and I add nutrition into the mix as well, really important for me. And I bring my findings to the show here on UK Health Radio, but also on podcast and on YouTube, where you may indeed be watching. And as an elemental Qigong teacher, I work and I play with energy all the time. And I'm still playing with the mastery of it all, but I do feel healthier now than I did when I was half my age. And I'm ever grateful for the mindful movement and inner alchemy techniques, which I personally blend with sound medicine, dance, and chants to nourish me well. So that brings me to the question, what about you? What are your best methods of energy management? You know, I always think the first up is to think, how do we de-stress? You know, what works best for you? I like to go out for walks as it takes me away from all the to-dos and it brings me into my natural being. So I feel like we can be more natural when we're in nature. You know, there's a support there. There's an ease. You don't have to try, you can just be. And I think I talk about the do be dance quite a lot, and you can see my yin yang symbol in the background, constantly reminding me that is there at the center of everything to help us come into balance, and to know that balance is there even though we've got the dance going on around it. So I also think that the thing that's important to give ourselves is space. And whenever I write the word space, I always do it in capitals with the gaps in between to remind me of that space. Well, the space is everywhere. Space is in the air, space is between your thoughts, between your breath. And that, I think, is a place to notice that you can then drop into, breathe, steady yourself and go, ah. I also like that space gives me time to tune in with my Qi. And on this episode, we are looking into the synergy of the East and West healthcare systems. And I'm really honored to introduce to you my guest here, Alex Brazkiewicz. He is an acupuncturist, an osteopath, and Tuina, a medical massage dude. And around a couple of years ago now, I think, I met him whilst being a body for my dear friend Mandy to practice her acupuncture moves on in a teaching environment in Brighton. I've always been interested in anatomy and physiology. I'm an ex-nurse, and of course I did my study with the elemental Qigong training, and acupuncture. I know that if I'd ever had any time, I would have definitely studied acupuncture, because the meridian line flows are so key to the elemental Qigong that I love so much. And I learnt so much over those 2 days, as Alex definitely explained and defined and offered clever, practical ways to discern what was needed for the patients. And I knew then that I'd like to bring him in for a chat. So here we are. Welcome in, Alex.
Thank you for having me, Clara.
Oh,
I can't believe it's a couple of years ago.
Well, I couldn't actually. I think it must have been because it was to do with the whole lockdown thing, wasn't it?
Right,
and
yeah.
I thought it was great that you were still offering was that the acupuncture CPD that you do?
That's right, my musculoskeletal course for acupuncture.
Yeah. It was great. So let's do an official introduction to you, because you have so many strings to your bow, and it's such a fascinating story, and I can't wait to ask you some questions about it. But let's start off with that you are an acupuncturist and an osteopath, but you also bring in the Tuina and medical massage. And what's fascinating that you were also a state registered paramedic for 16 years.
No, I was still at for 30 years.
Over 30 years, was it?
So I still am. But my front line work was 18 years with the London Ambulance Service. And the last 7 of which permanent nights at Waterloo, which at that time was the busiest station in the world.
Wow. Gosh. But you didn't go straight into paramedics. You were a policeman first, weren't you?
That's right. I mean, actually, my introduction to healthcare started even way before that. As a growing child, my mother had renal failure, and so in my teens, we were one of the first people to have home dialysis units at home. So 3 evenings a week, I was putting my mum on home dialysis because my father was in the Navy, was away an awful lot. So my first introduction to medicine was almost 50 years ago as a carer for my mother.
As a lad, I see, right.
Then she was a bit disappointed, therefore I took a slight detour to become a police officer. She said, you should always be a doctor. Unfortunately, she died when I was still in the police force, so she never sort of saw my career change from law enforcement to medicine. But I think she would have enjoyed it.
Yeah, she's probably watching over you and kind of gave you a nudge, actually, because
quite possibly.
Yeah, but that idea of you were in service, though, wanting to help people, being a policeman and then going into healthcare. But then came the Chinese medicine bit, didn't it? So is it in the early 80s through your martial arts studying?
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, in my teens, well, I went to university and I was a classic university dropout. The second year, I actually dropped out, didn't even bother turning up for my exams, went to work. But then I found my teacher. There's a saying when the student is right, the teacher become apparent. And I met my martial arts teacher, Mike Finn Sensei, and didn't realize what interested me then was the fact that he because I've been introduced to large classes of Tai Chi initially with the other classes of hundreds of people, and I think this wasn't for me. And his thing was small classes, and he'd just come back from Japan a few years before, having spent 7, 8, 9 years out there, and it was small classes, personalized tuition, and that really got to me. So I started off training in Kendo. In fact, the only reason why I stayed the first year was I paid my tuition fees for the year, and I'd be damned if I was going to give up because the training was grueling. But then my body became accustomed to it, and then the self-discipline. Then I expanded into Aikido, EI, and Jo, having black belts in all 4 disciplines. And I was fortunate to go back with my teacher to Japan in the early 80s to train with his teachers, because we went back there for the first time in about 10, 15 years, and 3 of the senior students, we went with him. We hired a flat in downtown Shinjuku, so he stayed with people and we stayed together, and we trained for quite a few months with his teachers, which was quite fascinating.
I bet. So yeah, just going out to Japan, and is this where you got into shiatsu?
Yeah, well, my teacher, when he was out in Japan the first time, he was a student of Namikoshi. Now it's quite funny, Namikoshi Shiatsu, developed by Namikoshi Sensei, used the Western medicine view of how the body works. Pressing on acupoints causes hormone release, etc. But that's the only type of acupuncture of shiatsu that was recognized by the Japanese Health Service at the time. The Zen shiatsu, the one that used the Chinese meridians, etc. system, the Japanese meridians, wasn't recognized by the health system, but it's more popular in the West. So it's a bit of a reverse.
Is this when this sort of peaking came for you around, like, what is this East-West synergy going on, Is that when it first sort of dropped in for you?
Very much so, very much so. And so I studied Namikoshi Shiatsu under my teacher, I said Mike Finn. And then when I left the police force, I thought I had a bit of time in my hands, and I thought between leaving the police and joining the ambulance service, best to explore the other side of it. And that's when I undertook the Zen Shiatsu under Chris Jarm at the European Shiatsu School. But unfortunately, I only completed 2 out of the 3 years. The final year I was accepted to the ambulance service, and unfortunately shift work and study didn't work too well, so something had to give.
Right, but it was still there. That's the teachings. Whether you finish courses or not, what you've learned stays with you. And so you were then drawn back to China. To what happened there? Because it was in the
in the ambulance service, that was my focus for the first 10 years or so. But then I became really interested in teaching, so I started up my own first aid training company, and that gave me the time to then go part-time in the ambulance service and go back to my initial interest. So then I bit the bullet and went back to university to study acupuncture. So doing that was building a business and still working part-time in the ambulance service, and helping my wife bring up our 2 kids.
I was going to say, you had children at the same time.
Yeah.
I bet, did you step into your own, your martial arts, your own way of nourishing yourself through all of that?
I think what the martial arts gave me was the discipline. In fact, there are far more clever people than me, both at universities and something in osteopathy. But I think that the thing is that gave me was the discipline, the staying power, and I think that's the self-discipline. I think was the main thing that the martial arts gave me, and the strength as well. I think both the inner strength and the physical strength. And I still train today, 40 years later. I still train as much as I can. But as you get older, you have to moderate things. You're not a 20-year-old, no matter what people think. But
I know you're so right. So Alex has actually been treating me for the last little while as well with my various musculoskeletal anomalies and the other stuff that my system is calling through. I remember once you said to me, in fact, when I'm lying face down on the couch there and Alex is chatting, he's telling me all this stuff and I'm learning things. I've been wanting to put a mic under your nose for so long. I'm going, wow, I can't remember. But I remember that you said to me, like, it's probably not a great idea for me to stand for too long. And I've been so used to my standing Wuji in Qi Gong that it's one of my go-tos. And it's like, and you were like, just don't do it for too long now. It's almost like you have to tune in with your body because of the hip thing that I've got going on. And it's like, you're right. Whereas back in the day, it might have been okay for me to do that. Now that adjustment to what do I need now? It doesn't have to be, I must do the same, it's like, what do I need? And is that what you mean about that adjustment as we age?
Yeah. Very much so. I mean, a lot of my patients are trying to, I won't say put themselves back to they were 30, 40 years ago. It's like my martial arts now, I still train, but I've toned down the training and I've moved to other things. Right. Dancing is another thing that I've reintroduced into my life again. It had the same thing, the distance, my eye, timing. Because the only thing I've got to remember is not to throw my dancing patients. That could lead to... But it's the same thing. So you adapt so you haven't got as much energy as you had when you were younger, but you have wisdom, hopefully, and experience, and then you can change things.
Right. Yeah. And wisdom, experience to sort of tune in with what your body needs, not try to be what you were 20, 30 years ago, but very to have the levels of health that you can have now. And I think movement, you say, is so important. The fluidity of joints and some spinal health. Would you say, what's the most important aspect of health if you're like over 50 from a musculoskeletal point of view? Is it joints, do you think?
Well, it's everything. I mean, it's movement. Yeah. There's a saying in Chinese where there's no movement, there's pain. Where there's movement, there's no pain. That's movement of qi around the body, gentle movement. Now, the thing is, people think if a little is good, then a lot must be better. That's not always the case. Right. So you need to tone it. You can overexert yourself and do too much. And you can deplete the body's energy. And a lot of ultra marathon runners and a lot of ultra fit athletes, they pay the price down the line, unfortunately. So you've got to limit yourself to, improve yourself, but be aware that there is a price to pay if you overdo it too much.
Yeah, is that being able to tune in with your qi, which is what the show is all about, and having wise people like yourself to go to sort of bounce ideas around. What am I doing here? I thought I was doing. Then you're like, well, have you come at it from that angle, or what is it you need? I mean, we often hear one of the things we need more than anything else is good hydration, and it's not any old water, is it? We need actually good quality water, and that helps everything flow better. It helps all the juices in the body be more vibrant, and of course, it's going to help your brain as well. And is that something? The water element being so important and key for your primordial essence in the acupuncture qigong side of things.
Well, we are basically a sack of skin bathed with organs floating in seawater, in effect, at the end of the day.
Nice.
But yes, I mean the water fluid is so important and correct, but overhydration can be a problem as well. So too much water can actually cause imbalance. The idea is balance in everything in life, I think.
It is balance, and you definitely need balance when you're going into dancing. And I know that since my ankles got so much better, thank you, Alex. I couldn't bear not dancing, and then Alex mended my ankle for me. It took a few sessions. I had to be very Yeah, cautious, but actually walking, you gave me walking back as well, walking for more distances and being able to feel strong and powerful on my legs. And I just took it into my ecstatic dance and find that has been a real source of, it's been a real tonic for me, actually. And then you were mentioning dance as well. And when did you get into dance? Is that something that's always been part of you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've always been into, I was a bit of an oddball when I was growing up in the 1970s. I actually enjoyed dance music from the 40s and 50s.
Okay.
So I've always been interested, and I started off dancing, but then when I got introduced to martial arts, I had to give one up or the other. So I gave up dance in favor of martial arts. So I've always been interested in dancing. And again, so I've moved back again, and I think the balance and the psychomotor skills that martial arts have given me an aid to dancing as well. There's much an equilibrium between the two. I think a synergy between dancing and martial arts.
Oh, I like that. We are here with Alex Brazkiewicz, who's an acupuncturist and osteopath. We're talking about the synergy of the East to West healthcare, and we've got into the dance arena. And I know that he has a track that he'd like to play you if you're listening on UK Health Radio. So what is that track, Alex, and why have you chosen it?
I said my favorite type of dancing, the swing dancing of the 1940s and 50s. And one of the first, in fact, when I was at school, I was part of a big band. I used to play trumpet and saxophone. And one of the first bits of music I ever played was In the Mood. And the Jive Bunny mix was a bit faster than the classic In the Mood mix, but it makes you just want to get up and dance and jive away.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Thank you so much for bringing this into the show. So we will be back to talk more around why the East-West synergy of healthcare is so important right now for us. Enjoy this track. I'm going to be doing a bit of dancing now. I can't help myself. Hey, welcome back into the Qi Time Collective, where your energy matters, with me, Clara Apollo, here on UK Health Radio, on podcast and on YouTube. And we are here with my guest. Now, I need to actually pronounce this correctly because he has just corrected me. It's Alex Brazkiewicz. Yes. And he is the acupuncturist and osteopath, and he runs the East-West Healthcare Hub up in Malvern. And he's also senior tutor on so many places. I actually lose track of just how many areas you have got your fingers in pies, and teaching people to really come into levels of health that they maybe could only have imagined before. And you have such an easy manner to you. It's very, you facilitate learning effortlessly, Alex, and I thank you for that. But we were just going through, your journey of how you've got to where you are today, and I'd really like to just speak into that in the between, was it 2008 and 2013, you went over, had many trips over to China to study the classical acupuncture and applied channel theory under Professor Wang. And I know you mention him quite a lot when we have chats as well. It feels like a very seminal time in your training. You want to share a little bit more about that with us?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. I said my first Mike Finn, my martial arts teacher, inspired me. But then I qualified at College of Integrated Chinese Medicine up at Reading. And a year after I qualified, I met Jason Robertson, who was an apprentice of Professor Wang. And we just hit it off. This is his pre-book tour for the Applied Channel Theory book, which is one of the seminal books of channel theory. And he hit it off, and he was organizing tours from his students in America to go and visit Professor Wang, and someone dropped out. And he asked me if I would like to go. Now, from a martial arts background, I knew that going to the East, introduction was that you can go off the boat and you can be there for 5 years and not meet the right person, have the right introduction, and it is everything. So I got permission from my wife. She allowed me to go and spent a month out there studying Professor Wang. He's a fascinating character in itself. He was one of the first, he was in the first graduating class of Chinese medicine in 1962, I believe. That's at a time when Chairman Mao brought all the schools to all the teachers together. Prior to that, you had your individual teacher that you went to. So he set up 4 or 5 universities, all these teachers went there, Sorry.
It's all right. We can pause that if you just want to go back to.
Yeah, I got interrupted, unfortunately. Sorry about that.
Don't worry. We can sort that out.
Right. So
you can talk about how all the teachers were coming together into the universities, and that Chairman Mao drew them all in. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So in the 1960s, Chairman Mao ordered all the teachers to come together at 4 or 5 major universities. Beijing, Nanjing were 2 of them, and so the first ever graduating class of which graduated in 1962, Professor Wang was one of the students there. So he was exposed to all the different types of clinical schools, both five element or 5-phase theory, stems and branches, channel theory, and also they were steeped in the classics. So it was before TCM became what was now termed TCM. So the classical Chinese medicine, both herbs and acupuncture. So, and then shortly after he qualified, the what would you call it? Cultural revolution occurred. So he was sent off into the countryside. So literally he's treating up to 100 patients a day in some cases. So he got that kind of clinical experience with ability to read classical Chinese, be taught by various different schools, and have an inquiring mind. Quite a unique, both a scholar, a clinician. It was right until he died. He was treating patients. Literally, the few months before he died, he was still treating patients, and that was in his 80s. So a clinician, scholar, one of the few sort of greats, I would say. And I was quite fortunate to meet him. And every year from 2009 to 2013, I either went a month in China or studied with him in Europe. But then in 2013, I also did a month's internship with the Tuina Hospital in Beijing. And in there, Tuina has a 6-year full-time doctorate level program, integrating both Chinese and Western medicine. When I said to my wife, can I go to China for 6 years? She said, of course you can, but don't bother coming back.
No.
So I looked for something in the UK that gave me that kind of level of expertise. And that's when I turned to osteopathy and went back to university again for another 5 years to study osteopathy. But
well, and what was that like, having gone in, having really steeped yourself in traditional Chinese medicine from, and having such an amazing teacher as well, to then come into the Western side? Were you seeing cross references, or were you actually watching yourself? How can this integrate? How can the East and the West do this? Because we're all one body unit, and yet holistic. There's so many different components, and so how does this synergize? How does this work? I'm so fascinated with your whole process of how you got to where you are now.
Well, I mean, to be fair, osteopathic philosophy is quite very, very similar to Chinese medicine, in that it believes the body is a self-healing mechanism. It heals itself. We tend to put a spanner in the works. We either overuse, underuse, or total abuse. And it's got the idea philosophically of the viz, the viz, Medicrix Naturae. It's the source of energy in the body. You got this source of energy, and then you use it as time goes on, and when it runs out, you die. The equivalent of Jing in Chinese medicine.
It's your Qi. It's the prenatal Qi thing, isn't it? I tell you what, Alex. When I first found out about that, in fact, my Qi Gong teacher was also the cranial sacral therapist. He told me that my prenatal Qi was shot because I was very burnt out, and I'm like, is that worrying? He goes, well, yeah, it is a bit, really. You need to be sort of doing something about it. I said, well, what can I do about it? He said, well, actually, Qi Gong is a really good mind, body, spirit exercise form that you can use that's going to help to nurture your postnatal Qi. And so it's like, gosh, I didn't realize that you were bequeathed a certain amount of prenatal, pre-heaven Qi when you're born, and when you use that up, that is where how chronic diseases come in, and then when you eventually, obviously other contributing factors as well. But there is this quotient of energy that you're bequeathed, that when you use up, you die. And there are various ways that you can nourish this. And this needs to be really looked at, doesn't it? Because this is when we take responsibility for our health and healing. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that was one of those ahas for me. I really wish I'd learned it in my teenage years.
A.T. Still, who's the founder of osteopathy, has said that the object of a physician is to find health. Any darn fool can find disease. And that is so, and again, functional medicine is very much looking for the cause, and they term syndromes of dysfunction, where they say patterns of disharmony. In Chinese medicine, they say patterns of dysfunction. So they're looking at the cause of so very much there's a school of Western medicine now that's moving towards finding the functional cause, but with a scientific background. And I think, to be fair, a lot of people sort of poo-poo Chinese medicine. We forget that Chinese medicine was the source of medicine for 3,000 years. That was used in China, and until the 17th century was the foremost, was the most advanced country in the world, to be fair. And it uses a scientific method. It has a problem. You've got a set of symptoms. It postulates the theory. So whatever the terms of medicine at the time is, yin yang theory, Wu-Xing 5 elements, Qi, etc., Qi and blood. It postulates the theory, a hypothesis. It tests the hypothesis using, thousands of practitioners on billions of patients over thousands of years, and then modifies it accordingly. So it does follow a scientific method. And if nothing else, the Chinese were great observationists. So we sort of forget that in the West. I think it's, to be fair, it's a part of our arrogance to a certain extent. I think we sort of forget that. But they're deep in observational medicine, observational scientific methods. So there's more similar than, and again, in osteopathy, the rule of the artery is supreme. Circulation is paramount. The circulation fails, whether it's blood, or in Chinese medicine we say qi and blood, that you get that moving, and the body will heal itself. And so in my understanding, there's a lot more similar in osteopathic philosophy than difference. Together with Chinese medicine. And I think, Professor, with that, the pictures behind me is when Professor Wang came over to the UK in 2012 onto Belfast after he stayed with. I looked after him, was over here, and he gave me the pictures behind me, and it basically, from all his experiences of studying Chinese medicine, it sort of summarizes what Chinese medicine is. And it says the left hand picture is the 5 Zhang organs foster essence and then govern destiny, and the channels on the right hand side permeate, irrigate, and thus govern life. So on the right hand side, the organs provide the qi and blood, the essences that actually flow around the body, and that's principle, the yang sheng principle, the preserving life by actually moderating your lifestyle, good sleep, good diet, movement, stress relief. All that will help promote and lengthen the essence as such, prolong the essence, whereas the irrigation, the channel system, which we use in acupuncture, helps regulate that. So actually it doesn't add things to it, it helps regulate the body to heal itself. And that's the idea behind, he believes, acupuncture is a more regulating mechanism. If you help regulate, the body will heal itself.
I love this. Alex Brazkiewicz, getting it right, is with us here on Qi Time, talking about the wisdom of Chinese medicine and osteopathy, and that's the synergy that's there. But it almost feels like it was always there. It's always there. There's just different ways of approaching it. And I'm loving that you're bringing this self-regulation, and then we were talking about balance a bit earlier on in the chat as well. And I think that, with balance, I don't know about you, but when I was doing my Qigong training, we used to do 4 days at a time every 2 months. And at the end of that 4th day, I would just feel, I wouldn't be able to put my finger on exactly how I felt, because I just felt really normal and balanced, almost like there was nothing to write home about. And I think in the West, we are so used to drama or, stress, extremes of things, that we forget that place in the middle is always calling us back in. Our systems are all wired for it, and that's where healing is. And when we can work with that or play with that, then we can really help our system to regulate. Obviously, come to practitioners like yourself as well to help any of the stagnation. But why do you think it is that we kind of are a bit averse to balance here in the West? Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I mean, I think the lifestyle's changed so much so in the past 50s. There's so much change that's gone on at a faster and faster rate. Additional stress. I mean, 200-300 years ago, your main stress was to keep alive. Now there's other stress. There's a low grade, what we term heat in Chinese medicine, in the low grade inflammation response, which I think is key to a lot of the underlying health problems we have in the West. And in the West, we've got disease of affluence, things like heart disease, stroke, diabetes, metabolic syndrome. All that lot can be traced basically to an inflammatory response, and a lot of that is the overload of stress, poor diet, poor lifestyle, lack of sleep, the idea that the genes that you have, the epigenetics, again, the genotype and the phenotype, the genes you're born with and the phenotype, those are expressed. Only about 20% of the expression of genes is the genes that you're born with. About 80% is the environment they're in, the fluid they're in, the nutrition they're in, and those determine which gene gets switched on and switched off. So we can take hold and we can we can take responsibility for a lot of our problems. And I think, especially in the UK and in the West, we abdicate a lot of that. We've got the wonderful NHS, but it was geared to offer life-saving, to save lives. Unfortunately, we put so much emphasis on it that it can cure everything. We sort of abdicate responsibility, and I think the present COVID problems have actually highlighted the fact that it can't be everything for everyone. And they're doing a wonderful job with what they can do. However, then they're just not geared up for it. And we have to take that responsibility for our own lives to a certain extent, looking out for our own health.
Exactly. And to be empowered to be able to take, wise choices. When I was growing up, I was fascinated with bodies. I wanted to be a nurse at a very early age when I visited my dear grandpa in hospital, and I just thought, oh my goodness, this feels so interesting. And then I got into human biology, and I'm like, this is really interesting. And it's like, why wouldn't everybody be interested in that? Like, isn't it an idea that we're all given a certain amount of education on how this amazing vehicle works? Because then we can take better care of it. So that, when you think about people just eating food that they fancy, that they like, without looking at, well, what actually does my food need? What actually does my body need? What food does my body need? And that idea that food is your medicine, it isn't just fuel. And that is something that feels so key, And so the choices that we make, and so the choices, the food that we make, and so many of the foods that are on offer in mainstream Western culture are inflammatory to the system. Don't get me started. Oh, we have. And I'm sure you've got something that you'd like to say about this as well, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, very, very, very much so. And I think it was, the problem being is the fast pace of life, having home cooked food, etc. I was quite fortunate. I said my mother was half Portuguese, my father was Polish. So in the 1970s, when I was growing up, I was had a home cooked lifestyle, whereas a lot of people, because of having to work, etc., and the fast convenience of fast foods, etc., that became the norm. So in the 70s, to a certain extent, the 80s, and much more the 90s and noughties, are very much so. The convenience food, fast food, has been the norm, and they're heavily subsidized. A lot of the fast foods are heavily subsidized anyway. So it's very, very difficult, I think, for someone to try and balance going out to work and everything else, and all the bills you have to pay and all the stresses. And it can be done, but it does take a bit of thought, I think.
I think we're getting back earlier in the in this episode. I was mentioning space and how space, just being aware that space is actually all around you, and and it's, you know, because it's invisible, the air is invisible, we take it for granted. Of course, we're very grateful to it, but I think because of this, there's this overwhelm and these stresses and this fast food and this everything has to be done yesterday, and there's all this worry and concern. This whole, you can feel it's like contraction. It feels like we're just whole contraction, and yet, you know, when we can actually breathe and open and expand and become a fuller version of ourselves, that's when the chi can flow easier and can nourish us, and we can then cope better with stresses and things. So I always come back to the breath, and I love that piece. That was another aha for me, was that when you breathe in, when you receive the breath, you're also breathing in the space that's around, so that you can actually let the space inhabit you. And I, that just helps me. I don't know if you've got any little simple practices that are like that could help.
The thing is that's another thing in the West, that as people say, we've got many minds in the West. We don't actually focus on anything in particular. You might be multitasking, you're watching TV, on Facebook, doing this, doing that, on the phone, etc. Whereas taking time to focus onto one thing. You look at a baby, when they want to eat, their entire focus, I want to eat. Then when they finish eating, they move on. Then they want to sleep, or they want to do, so they move on. And that's why I find dancing, I find my martial arts, when I'm doing my training, my Qi Gong training, or my Aikido training, or Jo, or dancing, you're in the moment. That's it. And I think being able to have that and be in that moment. In fact, when I went to Japan the first time, one of my teachers out there, Kuroda Sensei, he was a living national cultural treasure of calligraphy. He was awarded the Emperor Medal, and when we were over there, he gave us some calligraphy. And one of the calligraphy he gave me personally was a little saying in Japan: "Ichiman ichigo," one moment, one lifetime. In that, he said, you come back to Japan, we might meet again. It'll never be exactly the same thing. So treat each moment as if it will never happen again, because it won't. You can be in the same situation, but it won't be exactly the same. So work through life and treat each moment as a separate entity, and focus. And that's what I think martial arts has given to me.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alex, for sharing everything that you have here on Qi Time, but also everything that you bring to the world as well. How can people find out more about you? Where can they go?
Well, my website is www.eastwesthealth, all one word, -hub.com. That's on both my clinic and my CPD courses, and first aid course. I still teach first aid, and I've just finished teaching all the medical students at Guy's and Thomas and King's for the 20th year running. It's holoshealthcare.com, HOLOS healthcare.com.
Brilliant.
And thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. And if you're listening on podcast and YouTube, we're going to come back with Alex and talk a little bit longer about this synergy of East and West and why it's so important for us. But here on UK Health Radio, we're nearly out of time. So just to remind you that you can catch up with all the past Qi Time episodes on demand here on UK Health Radio, or the Qi Time podcast on most platforms, with some turning up on YouTube. And if you're watching YouTube right now, do like and subscribe, and then you can find out what's coming up next. And because I've always got stuff coming in that's going to help you nourish your chi and bring into well-being. And, you know, just as Alex has shared with us here, that was such a beautiful moment to acknowledge. So really appreciate that. And you can find out more about the elemental Qigong that I share on clarapollo.com, or come over to the QI Temple on Facebook, where you can drop some comments on any of the topics brought up in the show. I'd really love to hear from you and continue the conversation. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please do tell your friends, as the wisdom shared is priceless from amazing guests like Alex, who graced the show. So I hope that this has been useful for your health and well-being at these times of great change. So stay steady and keep your chi up, my friend. Thank you so much for listening to Qi Time with me, Clara Apollo, and my guest, Alex Brazkiewicz. Your energy is important, so are you. So here we are on podcast and YouTube, and I would just like to, because Alex is still with us, thank you so much. This key piece, I think there's you know, there's so much talk about China and the worries and all of that. And then but when we come into the Chinese healthcare system, like you say, it's actually part of the history of all healthcare, really. I mean, I'm going to start that again, Alex, because I've clearly got a throb going on. Which point am I doing? Is it the one on the main? He's doing so well. La. Okay.
Have a cup of tea. Have some water.
A cup of tea. So, thank goodness we're on pre-record. Okay, I'm going to go into this, how we can embrace more of the wisdom of Chinese and get beyond the funk that's going on in the mainstream media. So here we are on podcast and on YouTube. Alex Brazkiewicz is with me here, who's the East-West healthcare practitioner who's just done so much training in so many things, and he synergizes them in this unique way of finding what's just right for the clients, patients that he sees. But also I can sense there's this fascination with you, Alex, to sort of find what is true, what is really working. And it almost doesn't matter where you've learnt it from, if it makes sense and it rings true. And to pick up on what you were saying a bit earlier about how traditional Chinese medicine is actually the original medicine. I mean, I know we've got Native American medicine, we've got plant medicine, but then herbal medicine is part of Chinese medicine as well. And with everything that's going on around China and stuff, and all the worries that we have as Westerners with that culture, have we forgotten, or is it more tricky to actually embrace this wealth of true healthcare, this yang shen, as you said, this nourishing of life? Do you think we need to see beyond what's going on in the mainstream and go to the healthcare practices that they have that nourish ourselves?
Well, again, as far as what was taught traditionally in China and what is currently taught in China is not necessarily the same thing, because there's a lot of influences from the political regime in there, etc., etc. So although they are starting to realize now what they are losing, but a lot of the older practitioners dying off in effect, so they're trying to claw back. I know that Professor Wang, before he died, it was last few years, he was one of the chief instructors, set up workshops to teach the new practitioners coming through the classical wisdom as such, because I think with such an eagerness to embrace in the 1980s and 90s to embrace the West, and the fact that a lot of the ideas in classical Chinese medicine didn't correspond with a communist regime, they needed to sort of quell that. They're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and I think they're realizing a lot of that now, and they're trying to draw on those last grand masters before they die and pass on, unfortunately. So they're trying to claw back that kind of wisdom, but very much so the idea of the Yang Shen principle of looking after yourself, and all the practices, etc., meditation, whatever form that is, the breathing techniques which are part of meditation, movement. I said martial arts and dancing, movement and meditation, because you're focused on one thing, that the outside just disappears. Good health, good lifestyle, good sleep, all those impacts on your body. And so the idea, from a modern point of view, the epigenetics, the idea that your genes switch on and off depending on the environment they're in, very much a part of functional medicine. So Western science is sort of coming to not to the backup, but is actually confirming what we also know deep in our hearts, what is the right way. Unfortunately, modern life tends to get into the way of things, unfortunately, and that is a problem. It does require an effort, I think, to actually do that. And I said before, and the way things are going, my personal belief is that because for so long we've abjected responsibility for our health, we can abuse our bodies so much the NHS will fix us. Well, it can't do that, unfortunately, and I think that has been found out that it's not going to be able to do everything for everyone, and we have to take that responsibility for looking after our own health to a certain extent.
To a certain extent, and also to get into preventative healthcare to stop things from happening in the first place. And is there a story about why do so many people in China practice Tai Chi and Qi Gong? You know, you see them out in the parks doing their thing, and it's like, was there a story about how at the Cultural Revolution, it was said that there was no money for healthcare services for the mainstream, and so people had to do this preventive healthcare. Have you heard that story? Is that true?
Well, not that one. I do know that in the early stages of communist regime, when the Western medicine was cut off, Chairman Mao had to actually be able to offer healthcare for billions of people,
yes,
or hundreds of millions of people, without money. So that's when he became very much a fan of Chinese medicine. Now, you've got to imagine in the 1920s and 30s, acupuncture, for example, was almost not heard of in China. It literally been wiped out because of the influence of Western medicine. So a lot of the older guys were still there, but they wasn't that popular. Herbal medicine to a certain extent was, but acupuncture wasn't. So they sort of revitalized that. But then I said the 1960s and 70s, the 50s was okay because they still adopted classical Chinese medicine, but I think from my own research, they didn't fall into the communist way of thinking. And that's when in the 70s and 80s that there was a complete shift to take out a lot of the good that was in the classical Chinese medicine. But on the flip side, it did bring in the sort of mixing a bit of the Chinese and the Western medicine as well. So it does. I know. So when I went to the Tuina Hospital in Beijing in 2013, Dr. Richard there, 1 minute would talk about the Shaoyang channel Sini meridian, and the next minute the femoral cutaneous nerve innervation. So where West does come in quite good, it's very good at reductionist, going down to the nitty gritty, down to the individual muscles, atoms, molecules, etc. But then being able to look at that and then take a step back and look at the entire system. Because the Western medicine, the thought processes there were actually to find a bug and kill it. You got the trauma, fix it, and move on. It's not geared, I think, presently to this idea of letting the inform you to help the body heal itself. It's more of a find the bug and fix it, or nuke it. Where I think there is a movement now, especially in functional medicine, the idea of the way it's taught in medical schools to actually find the bug is okay for that type of acute medicine, but for more chronic conditions, you have to encourage people to adopt a healthy lifestyle. And you can see it in the TV now. You look on TV now, you can see programs on nutrition and cooking now that and healthy lifestyle. 5 years ago you'd never see on TV. So you can see even mainstream media, things have changed to try and educate people, because we've got generations of people that don't know how to cook, for example, because they were brought up in families where there was no cooking, or fast food and takeaways was the order of the day. So I think there is a move towards educating people about. That's why I think there is hope for the next generation, in that things are moving to help people to look after themselves. And put less burden on the system. So then the NHS can be there to design what it's fight for what it's designed for, to actually help fight the acute conditions, the serious life-threatening stuff.
And I think that one of the good things about the lockdowns that we've had is a lot of people are now growing their own vegetables, and there's a thrill in that, getting your veggies out of the garden, sharing with your neighbours, and all of that responsibility for growing your own food. And that was something that was always, my dad used to have a big vegetable patch, and it was like, well, if you could, you would. But I wonder if that was part of, he was brought up in the war, and that was very much what went on there. But it's also the responsibility of nourishing yourself, and with all the food worries and all of that going on as well, you're coming back to, what can I do for myself? And even if it's a window box just with microgreens on it, there's something about the energy of growing something for yourself that empowers you. It brings in the nourishment. So I often think with it, the best thing about Western medicine is its surgery. But you were saying, I love the way that you described how it's reductive. It gets into the actual nitty gritty of the point, but then you come back out again and see the bigger picture. So is this how you see the synergy between the East and West really marrying well now?
Very much as a pragmatic approach, I think. They aren't the same system, because the basis of Chinese medicine is different. The actual terminology is different, but it's the same body, just looking at it from different prisms. And that's the idea, is that you need to pick what's best. There's a time when you need to know which muscles work to which area from my own personal point of view, and then take a step back and see how that might impact on other parts of the body. And very much so in acupuncture, there's a lot more research now in acupuncture than there was, say, 20 years ago. In fact, it's one of the most researched topics in the world now. That's why in 2020, NICE was awarded acupuncture one of the 4 modalities for chronic pain. There's acupuncture, limited pharmaceuticals because of the addictiveness of a lot of them, movement, exercise, and things like CBT. Those are the only 4 modalities NICE now recommend for chronic pain. So that's down to the research in acupuncture. I mean, Helena Langevin and Jeffrey Bernstock, both. Helena Langevin is, I think, professor in residence at Harvard Medical School, but she did her, I think, endocrinology at Johns Hopkins. She did another master's in Cambridge University, I think. But she's very much on the forefront of acupuncture research and what happens when you put a needle in and how it connects with the fascial network and it causes signaling down the body. Jeffrey Bernstock postulated the theory in the 1970s that ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the molecules of energy, is in fact a signaling molecule. And then when you actually distort the fascia, either through heat, needles, or stretching exercises, that causes those signals to be ATP to be secreted, and that causes signaling upstream. And that was poo-pooed initially until the 1990s. They found receptors for purogenic signaling in the brain, and since there's been a massive drive, and they've actually did experiments where they cut off the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, and yet signal was still getting through. So ATP, energy, is a co-signaler with the body's own nervous system. So there's a lot. That's when it becomes really fascinating to see there is a scientific basis. Because in the West we want, and I could see where as Helena Langevin says, we treat it as one science. You want to investigate it as thoroughly, Chinese medicine, classical, whatever medicine, you investigate it as thoroughly, because don't presume because someone's written down 1,000, 2,000 years ago, it's gospel. And in fact, Charlie Buck, acupuncturist, and I think is addressed to the BXC a few years back, said that yes, about warm food. Yes, warm food is good, but 1,000 years ago, cold food was quite frankly dangerous. You had to cook it to be safe. So energetically, you need to look on. There's a lot of things about food, etc. But cold food is cleaner now than it was, 1,000 years ago, potentially speaking. So you have to be pragmatic in your approach and pick up what's best, but don't think. I know in martial arts, again from a martial arts background, my teacher would say to me that in Japanese martial arts, you go to a school and you spent 5-10 years, sweat, blood and tears. Once you proved your worth and literally sweat, blood and tears, you might have been taught a technique where you cut towards the top of the body, whereas after 10 years, actually what they mean, you take a final flip at the end and come underneath the armpit where the weakness of the armor is. And once you proved your worth, you would actually get told the real meaning of the technique. Likewise in medicine, you had to prove your worth to a master, because that was the way it was a student master approch. Once you proved your worth, then they'll tell you that the secrets as such. Yeah. So where was I going with this? So
yeah, we're on a good one there.
Yes, I know. So there's the idea that because something was written down, again in China, there's the idea of ancestor worship. So an ancestor wrote something down, they would never disagree with it. But because your teacher would say, yes, this was written down, but this is what actually works. So they would take. So that's the disciple apprentice teacher approach. They would say, this is all written down, this will take, but this you can leave because this actually works. And that's lost in the university type system that we have, because it doesn't make money teaching one-on-one, having that kind of apprentice approach. Universities can't function with a one-on-one approach. So just because something was written down 2,000 years ago, and don't treat it as gospel. On the flip side, from research, for example, the randomized controlled trials with acupuncture. Well, to have a true randomized controlled trial, you must have complete placebo. But the idea, when you put a needle, you touch someone, or you do a manipulation, whatever, you're altering the fascial network, it's no longer placebo because it's no longer inert. And therein lies a problem. So in that the RCT, the randomized controlled trials, are the gold standard. But when you're talking about a whole body approach, that's okay when you talk about drugs, one drug with, one drug without. But anything we got to touch on a person, trying to get placebo is very, very difficult. So there are other ways of investigating, and also how you can word an investigation, or how you word a research can actually alter your outcomes. You can sort of predict what the outcome is going to be to a certain extent. I know that in 2016, the NICE guidelines came out about acupuncture, and they removed it from back pain. And there was a furor of the NICE guidelines. But what they did is they took acupuncture, sham acupuncture, and normal care. And if other modality, they compared the modality against normal care. With acupuncture, they compared it against sham acupuncture. But so there's very little difference between the two, but both are better than normal care. Now, when you go and see your practitioner, you don't say, "Oh, is acupuncture better than sham acupuncture?" They say, "Is acupuncture better than the normal care?" Which is what they're looking for. But if you target the question differently, you can get the result that you want. So, yes, don't think everything that was born before was actually written down was gospel. Conversely, how you look at your research, the ability to read research, I think is important as well. And that's what my recent training sort of given me the ability to look at some kind of some of the research and say, well, if this is, have they asked the right questions? Asking the right questions is the key thing.
It is, isn't it? And the contextualization of the information as well. And that thing about how the observer affects the field just as well as you said, that it's all, how can you actually have a placebo effect or the random control file. So what is it about teaching that you love? Because I know not only you love to learn yourself, but you are a teacher. What actually are you teaching? Acupuncture, you're teaching Tuina, you're teaching your first aid. You know, it's like, what if I missed something out?
No, that's about it. Yeah, I mean, I've done and martial arts. I'm an instructor at my dojo. I just love teaching. I love passing on. I mean, I think I owe it to my teachers who spent time to teach me to pass on to the next, and then build on it. You know, we only know what we now know because standing on the shoulders of the people that came before us. And the idea is to actually, move on and encompass good quality research, good quality teaching, and empower other people to help. I mean, I found it so often. That's inspired me to start up my first aid training company many moons ago. Being on the sharp end, and literally as a paramedic, life and death. I've seen everything. I've delivered kids to 400 cardiac arrests in my lifetime. So everything in between. It really informed me that if some people knew what to do at the get-go, an outcome could be different. So that inspires me to. And I've been teaching now for first aid now for near enough 40 years, over 50,000 people. I still get as much passion now as I did before when I first started, even more so. The feedback we have from people saying how it's changed their lives, how they're able to say their partners and relatives, etc. It really does inspire me to, and my staff. There's a group of us, family orientated, my wife and kids, and a few select instructors that we use. And likewise in acupuncture, and Tuina, the students that go through, when they come back and say they've used these techniques to help people, it really makes a warm glow, really, to know that they can adapt it. No one medicine is perfect. If it was, we'd all be doing it. The idea is to actually be quite pragmatic in your approach.
But yeah, there is. Thank you, Alex. There's only so much one person can do, and if you can share your teachings with someone else, they can go off and help more people. So I think that there is that as well. You serve better when you're able to share the teachings, and it was like a natural way of being. Particularly when you get to a certain age, you kind of think, "Oh, what is my legacy?" And you've got a huge legacy here, haven't you? So, gosh,
well, yes. We're still learning. I say to people, the day I stop learning is when I stop pushing up days from 6 foot under. So we're always learning, no matter what.
Yes. So what's next for you, Alex? Where are you going next?
Well, after a couple of years of putting into practice my osteopathy and my integration, and realizing how important nutrition is and inflammatory response, I'm going back to uni again at the Northern College of Acupuncture to do my master's in nutritional science, to hopefully bring that into the fold, because I think nutrition, we said already, is such an important part of healthcare, and also looking after yourself and empowering other people to do that, to help themselves, really.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Absolutely. Throughout this whole conversation, it's kept coming back to that, isn't it? How can you help yourself? How can you empower yourself, and to trust that the choices that you know are true in you are really valid and worthy, that and to know, because we can find out all sorts of information. There's a lot of misinformation as well. So it's like, where do you go to? So to do the trainings, there's online trainings as well as in person. And it is that, get genned up. What do you feel will be useful moving forward? I mean, if you've got any advice as we sort of come to the end of this discussion.
Yeah, I mean, you can find one-day courses in this, that, and the other. I mean, my own philosophy. I mean, forgetting nutrition, everyone's an expert in nutrition because we eat everyone eats. But you need to actually be able to actually go into it in depth, and that's what I think the martial arts has given me, is the ability to actually have that discipline to look in it in depth. So look at courses that are quite reputable. I think they're reputable 1 or 2 day courses, but if you're going to study something, do something that you enjoy, that's actually going to bring benefit to you and your clinic, to you as a practitioner, to you as your clinic as a practitioner, or to you as a person, and look for some reputable sources. Really, that's it. But do what you enjoy. Life is too short.
Exactly. And then practice on your friends.
Yeah, exactly so.
Hey, Alex, it's been an absolute joy to have you here on Qi Time. Thank you so much. And thank you for all that you do for all of us. Thank you for how much you've helped me and Mandy. I know, definitely. It's been a real relief to know you and to come and be treated by you. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. See you next time. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do tell your friends. Play the replays are there for you to come back to. You might want to go back and take some notes, because when Alex was off on one of his wisdom shares, it's like, what did he say there? So it's really good that we've actually got you recorded. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I do when I get passionate about something, my speed of speech does increase. So I do apologise. Students take it all the time.
The gesticulations are happening. It's like you live and breathe this, don't you? And that passion is really discernible, and it comes through in the high quality of treatments that you give as well. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Keep your chi up, my friend. Chi is important.